This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into what is a very special edition of Still Enrolled, the live version, right here on YouTube. Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here as we are set to react to the two college football playoff semifinal games. Big Ten, 1 out of 2. In terms of getting teams in the national title game, Penn State loses to Notre Dame. Ohio State on Friday night does beat Texas. Buckeyes now looking for one of the greatest turnarounds I think we've ever really seen in college football based on where they were 6 weeks ago, now where they're on the precipice of in terms of winning a national title. We got breakdowns. We got analysis of both games. We got futures for Penn State, what it means for Ohio State. We got so much to break down here for both of these games. But Tripp, it feels fitting to start here, right? Where when the college football playoffs started, there was a lot of complaints about these crappy games and all these blowouts. Going to 12 was a giant mistake. College football was ruined. And here we are in the semifinal game with the 4 best teams remaining, getting 2 down-to-the-wire, exhilarating games that absolutely delivered in terms of excitement.
Yeah, when you look at the first 8 games of the college football playoff, really the only game that lived up to what I think a lot of people were hoping for was the Texas-Arizona State game. When you had a back-and-forth game in Texas with their season on the line, able to convert a 4th and 13 for a touchdown. You had college kickers being college kickers in that game. And out of the first 8 games, you got one really good game where I think, and I know we've discussed it, a lot of that goes into how the playoff was formatted. And ultimately, in the end, yes, I believe we ended up with the best 4 teams left. I'm sure Oregon would have loved a different path potentially. The teams that had the bye, I truly believe having the bye was a detriment to those 4 teams in the college football playoff. But ultimately, it felt like you probably had the 4 deserving teams, the 4 best teams left at the end of the day. And we got 2 incredible semifinal games back and forth between Penn State and Notre Dame. Texas. I mean, just look at the storyline of the season. For Texas to have a goal-to-go situation from the 1-yard line against that Ohio State defense, trying to tie the game where Ohio State has been so good at the goal line all season long. And Texas has had its struggles there, right? And and for it to end on Jack Sawyer, the Columbus native, going the lifelong Ohio State fan, the scoop and score for 82 yards. You got 2 games between 4 blue bloods. And I'm sure ESPN executives will be salivating over the ad revenue and the ratings that this produces. But this ultimately, when you think of an expanded playoff, and I know this was the round of 4, right? But look at where these teams were seated. This was an ideal Final Four. And it's teams outside of the top 4 that end up playing in it. And Ohio State getting second life because of an expanded playoff becomes the favorites going into the national championship against a Notre Dame team that was able to overcome that loss to NIU in week number 2 and hasn't lost since, and earned their opportunity to play for a national championship by stealing one in a thriller against Penn State.
No, you're right. And we'll get to that game here in a little bit. If you also want to give your thoughts here, as we are live, we have the ability on YouTube to comment. So if you want to give your thoughts here about Ohio State's win, Penn State's loss, where the Nittany Lions go from here, what it means for the Buckeyes here as they're 1 win away from their first national title in 2014. Leave your thoughts here. We'll react to them as the show does go on here. But you mentioned it, Tripp, right? The play of the game, one of the plays of Ohio State football history was Jack Sawyer strip sacking Quinn Ewers, taking it 83 yards to the house. And I think it's fitting because for me, like when you look at Ohio State's turnaround with where they were after the Michigan loss, where they were essentially left for dead. No belief in Ryan Day, no belief in this team. I mean, there was jokes even, right, about how a home playoff game is probably actually not a good thing for Ohio State with how mad this fan base is. And now you look at where they came in late November, early December to where they are right now, playing great football and 1 win away from a national championship. It feels fitting that Jack Sawyer got the game-defining play because for me, at least, the Tripp, like this turnaround for Ohio State, it feels like it does start with their defensive line, where they've been dominant all season long, and they make the game-changing play that gets them fittingly into the national title game.
Yeah, I'm glad you went that direction with it because there's been so much focus and talk about Ohio State's offense. And I thought Will Howard was really good again in this game for Ohio State. Had that pivotal play where, look, the turf monster got him, but it was a crucial 4th down run where they needed to extend a drive. And I thought their offense against Tennessee and Oregon, rightfully so, deserved all the accolades. But it was the Ohio State defense, not just in this turnaround, Ryan. I think it was this Ohio State defense from the beginning of the year to the end of the year that was consistently great. Maybe the best in the entire country. I guess we'll kind of decide that in the national championship, who's got the best defense in the nation this year.
True.
I thought throughout the year they were really, really good. But I still expected more at points from JTT and Sawyer on the defensive line. I thought they were really good. And again, but it never felt like they took over a game. Great season, but not an elite season. In the playoffs, those two, coupled with their D tackles, have taken their game to another level where they have impacted and changed the game. Not just been a steady, solid force, impacting and changing the game. Couple that with their linebackers, and I thought Caleb Downs was all over the field and fittingly gets the game-ending and game-sealing interception last night. But I think it was their ability to change the game in the playoffs where Ohio State's defense – all the talk's been about Ohio State's offense all year long and the ups and downs, but what their defense has done consistently, but then to elevate it, as you talk about, and make plays at the line of scrimmage. It wasn't Ohio State's offensive line being their bugaboo. They held up against the elite defensive fronts that they have faced in each of the 3 rounds of the playoffs so far. But their defense also making the plays because of Sawyer and JTT, who have been incredible in the playoffs.
You may how do you make game-changing plays on defense, right? Usually it's negative plays and turnovers, sacks. You look at these 3 game strips, kind of put some stats of what you just were talking about. In 3 playoff games, Ohio State has 16 sacks, 28 tackles for loss, and they continue that dominance last night against Texas, where they have 4 sacks on viewers, 4 quarterback hurries, 9 tackles for loss. They held Texas's run game to just 2 yards per carry. And like you mentioned, the goal line stand, which they have done all season long, fitting that you get the stop on first down. And I know there's a lot of criticism on Steve Sarkisian for that second down decision to run a toss play that lost 7 yards. I'm not going to defend him. The bad play call. With that said, though, you can understand the logic from Steve Sarkisian because he's seen this all season long. This is an Ohio State defense that once you get in the red zone, they clamp down. And after that first down and goal, I think he said, we don't have a shot. This is one of the best offensive lines in all of college football. And he said after one play, we can't run the ball down their throat. If that's not the ultimate sign of respect, Trip, I don't know what is.
Yeah, but you can't. I don't mind that you're not going to run straight ahead in that situation, but you can't run a play that's going to result in negative yardage. It's like if you're going to get stopped, throw a pass. If you're going to get stopped, run straight into the line of scrimmage, but don't lateral it to a guy 6 yards back or pitch it to a guy 6 yards back and result in a negative play. You can't have that in that situation. You can't have a negative play. It was not a good call. It was not a good call. Not at all.
I agree with that. But also I think at the same time, you look back at the Penn State game, right, where they basically tried to ram it down their throat 4 times and got stuffed. I think I think Sark watched it and realized
they should have used Arch Manning. Arch Manning should have seen the field in that situation. I know it's so unconventional, but that sometimes Penn State should have used Tyler Warren in that situation in the game that they lost. That's where you have to go, just whatever it takes, but you can't run away from your ultimate. Ohio State's speed at all 3 levels is unbelievable. You can't. And Downs was the guy who read the play and blew the play up to no surprise.
And it's their Ohio State's ability right now to have both a physical defense up front and then also an equally fast defense. Like you said, they can stuff you up the middle and they can run sideline to sideline. It is absolutely impressive. And this is highlighted too by look at this stat, Trip. Yep. When you look at red zone attempts, teams have gotten to Ohio State's red zone 36 times this year, including last night. They have scored touchdowns 15 times. That is 41%. You get in the red zone, you score a touchdown. That's elite. That's the best in the country. Yet again, biggest reason why they win. It's incredible. You can, like you said, the defense goes overshadowed. 2 reasons. Number 1 is just defense now is always overlooked when it comes to offense. Offense sells. And number 2, with how much skill talent Ohio State has, everyone always talks about their offense. This defense, man, if they win the championship, and assuming they can beat Notre Dame, number 1, it's the defense.
And the interception against Michigan, too. If they find a way to win that game in the end instead of lose that game in a tight one, that interception is one. You thought that could be the defining red zone play of Ohio State's season. Them getting the stop on Penn State in the red zone when Penn State had goal-to-go situation from the 3-yard line and couldn't score in 4 plays. And that's a Penn State team with the elite running back tandem of Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, and Tyler Warren in the backfield. And at that time still had Bo Prabula. But then for them to do it again against Texas on this stage, that defense, man, that defense. How do you think they played offensively in this game? Right? Like, to me, if you can look big picture at the 2 semifinal games, and I think there's a lot of correlation between the two. Ultimately, it comes down to, like, this was a close game. Could have gone either way. Texas scores there. Texas is a yard away from this having a complete. You never know where it goes, right?
Right.
And I think these were 2 games that were incredibly close, incredibly hard fought. Great players making great plays on both sides. Like, I don't know. There's not a lot I can take away from Texas or Penn State and say, well, what could have been. It's what could have been because you missed a few opportunities. But it's not that you played a bad football game. I thought both losing teams, just like the 2 winning teams, played pretty well. But when I look at the 2 semifinal games, it's big players making big plays in big moments, and then which team is just simply able to execute on a couple of. You can point fingers at play calling or the lack of a passing attack for Penn State and its wide receivers. Like, looking at that game, but Texas is the same thing. It's you just didn't make 1 or 2 plays in a big spot, and Ohio State did. And sure, you can go through the entire game last night and point to, well, this situation, could Texas have converted here? Could they have gone for it here? Do you like that decision by Sark? But really, it comes down to Ohio State, by a very, very thin margin, just made a few additional plays in the game. And the biggest one to me is the 75-yard, like, Texas comes back, ties it, and then to allow a 75-yard touchdown right before the half. Like, that's the story of the offense for Ohio State. Smith only had 1 catch for 3 yards. Carnell Tate was their leading receiver, 7 catches, 87 yards. But I guess that long, rambly, like, kind of discussion there, where it's kind of a big picture tied into a small picture thing. Ohio State's play of the game offensively was just the 7 points before the half because Texas had gone down to tie it.
No, you're right. That was talking about like just a game-changing momentum play, but also too, even after Texas bounces back, scores a 3rd quarter touchdown, it's 14-14.
Yep.
Ohio State starting really with Will Howard and throwing the ball early, running it late on that drive. It was like a 13-play, 88-yard drive. That to me is like which shows the mental toughness and resiliency of Ohio State that I don't think they've had, for a large part of their, like, in their history. Like, you talk about all the flash, they've always had the players and the skill on offense. And I think you can look at Ohio State's downfall in terms of maybe more talented teams coming up short and not winning national championships or not getting as far as they should. I think in large part, you can kind of look at that and say, well, they didn't really have the resiliency that other teams do have. And while you could argue, is Will Howard the most talented quarterback Ohio State's had? I would say absolutely not.
I mean, it's hard, though, because they won a national championship with a 3rd-string quarterback.
No, you're right. But they've had, Justin Fields has been better.
But I think in recent
Stroud's been better.
To your point, though, and it's a different format, right? And they have a Michigan problem. They've lost to Michigan 4 times in a row. But in those games, Michigan's been the team that's kind of wanted it more and has been able to handle adversity more and better and plays a little bit more of an edge. And I think Ohio State because I think it's an unfair statement to make about their program over the last 2 decades. Because when you have players like Young and Bosa, like, there's this thing, oh, it's all speed. And no, they're physical and they're really deep and they win in the trenches up front on both sides of the football over the last 2 decades. And that's why they've been really good. But I think they lost some of that chip on their shoulder because they were the class of the Big Ten. And I think Michigan played with a bigger chip the last couple of years. Now, this year, they still lost to Michigan, but that may have been a blessing in disguise because how they reacted after that game, they could go 1 or 2 ways. Fold and say, can't believe, woe is me. Or they could be angry, furious, disturbed. They're pissed off.
Right.
and they ended up turning it into a real positive for them, and they have played like the team with something to prove in the playoffs. I think that's what makes them so dangerous. They have the best roster in college football, but now they're playing for something bigger than themselves and bigger than just winning football games. And I think that's what's made them real dangerous. And Ryan Day deserves a ton of credit to get them to play that way.
He absolutely does. Just one thing I want to at least mention on Will Howard before we do get to Ryan Day is the fact that it does feel like maybe you're right, that some of it is just like, look, they've never really been poked before, right? And now this is their chance to kind of play the underdog card, even though they've been a favorite in every game, that they can still kind of play that no one believes in us sort of thing. But it does feel like, at least like when you look at like the ability to bounce back, it does feel like Will Howard's the perfect quarterback that Ohio State's been missing. This is a guy that has elevated his game in the playoff. We look, he's averaging over 300 yards per game in these 3 playoff games, 6 touchdowns, 2 picks. Like, he's played his best football now when Ohio State's needed him to. And he's also provided that leadership to where, going back to like after Texas scores that touchdown, make it 14-14, it's a good drive for them. Momentum feels like it's sort of changing outside of, like I said, that 75-yard touchdown play to Trevor Henderson right before the half. Ohio State's offense was not moving the ball a ton after that first drive. So, okay, maybe, Texas survived the early wave, and now all of a sudden it's their game to lead your team in that moment when the game is up in the balance and could go either way. And where I think if you lose, like you talk about the world crashing, all the goodwill you have from the Tennessee win and the Oregon win are out the window, and we're talking about this season as a failure, in that moment late in the third quarter to kind of bounce back and lead your team on a long drive, a statement drive that ended up being the game-winning score, I can't give Will Howard enough credit. And also I want to say, Tripp, they've also, to Ohio State's credit, given more on his plate, and he's provided. Like, look at this playoff. Like, he came in the regular season, he averaged 26 pass attempts per game. Right? They tried to be balanced, and they had that great rushing attack with Henderson and Judkins. Now, because of the offensive line injuries, they've put more on his plate, where Will Howard in these 3 playoff games has attempted 26, 29, 33 pass attempts, either at or above his regular season average. The more Ohio State's asking from him, the more he's delivering. And you said it, it's also equally impressive. Jeremiah Smith is invisible in this game. And it's still, he had success, Howard, that is. And Ohio State, maybe not as much as they had against Oregon and Tennessee, obviously, but still had enough success to win this game.
And also probably because Texas is the best defense of those groups that they played.
Also very true.
The speed, the side-to-side speed, what they could do at the defensive end position with the freshman Simmons. Look, and in this game, Ohio State only ran for 3.5 yards a carry. Like Henderson and Judkins, I know they didn't run a ton, but they never got that on track the way they did in the first 2 playoff games. So more in that area falls on Will Howard's plate as well. And for him to distribute against the Texas defense that did a good, like, you can point, why did Jeremiah Smith not have a big game? He was the focal point of their defense, and their game plan outside of stopping the run was stop number 4. But to have Tate 7 for 87, Egbuka 5 for 51, G. Scott 5 for 30, and then to have your running backs total 97 yards on 4 catches and using them in the pass game, it's smart. Howard took what was available to him in this game, and he played like a veteran quarterback. And he's got moxie. The team believes in him. And I don't think that belief in him's wavered all year. They've believed in him all year long, even when things have gone wrong. He slides down at the end of that Oregon game, and they run out of time. That's on Will Howard. That's on Ryan Day for the play. But they never stopped believing in the guy. Well, against Michigan, they could not get anything going offensively. He did not have a good day throwing the ball. They didn't throw the ball enough, and they could never get their run game on track. And they didn't utilize him in the running game, but they still believed in Will Howard. I had a sneeze coming up.
Oh, that's the worst. I feel bad really for you.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Oh, I saved it.
Wish you let it out. No worse feeling than a sneeze not coming through.
No, there's no worse feeling than trying to hold in a sneeze and holding it in. Then you feel like, how do you get rid of it then? Like that
lingers.
That to me is the worst. I was fumbling around trying to move my cursor over on top of the mute button. So even if it happened, it didn't disrupt you because I knew you had a really good follow-up, I think, on Will Howard. No?
I got nothing. You think I got any sort of good insight here? That's why we rely on you.
Let's shift to Ryan Day. Right? The narrative coming into this, and even in this, I remember on our podcast to preview on Monday, we talked about is it a successful season now for Ohio State? is it a successful season if they beat Texas, or do they have to win the national championship? And like this national narrative, you and I have talked about it. We don't buy in on the Ryan Day, Ryan Day, fire Ryan Day. That's it's an asinine discussion. It doesn't hold any weight or merit. The guy is one of the best coaches in college football. I mean, just look at his record. It speaks for itself. They've been dominant here in these playoffs. And we always go back to, well, who are you going to replace him with? What's your option? He doesn't get any respect for making Ohio State. Look, it is hard. I think people forget, and we're going to talk about this probably more with Penn State here in a couple minutes, but how hard it is to get there, how hard it is to win, no matter what your roster looks like, no matter what resources you have, no matter what your NIL is, no matter what your budget is for your roster. It's really, really hard to get there. Really hard to get there. But you can tell how much the players love Ryan Day. And he has this program positioned. I guess Oregon, you can talk about in that same discussion. Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State. But anytime you're talking about the top 3 programs in college football, Ohio State, whether they're 1, 2, or 3, is on the list. So you might fall short a couple of times, but why is that a bad thing? This has to feel so gratifying for Ryan Day to watch his team perform this way and listen to all the interviews after the game, perform for their coach.
Jack Sawyer loves him. Like you said, he praised him after the game. Like, this is one where when you actually look at Ryan Day and what he's accomplished in his entirety of his career, like, again, I know we talked about it a few podcasts ago, but I think he's just proving our point even more. Like, I think he's the second best coach in college football. Like, you look around, like, there are not many coaches doing what Ryan Day's doing, not just at winning at a high level, but doing it consistently. Second national title appearance now in the last 5 years. He has Ohio State every year knocking on the door. He has a Michigan problem, absolutely, but that Michigan problem is no longer prohibitive for Ohio State's ultimate goal, which is to win a national title.
Exactly. He's 69-10, and in Big 10 games, he is 46-5. 4 losses to Michigan and 1 to Oregon this year. They win all the games they're supposed to.
And they also beat everybody else, Trip. It's not like, oh, he can't beat Michigan and they lose all the big bowl games. Like, they are competitive and or win a lot of these big games they're in outside of Michigan, where it's asinine to want him. There better be a lot of Ohio State fans eating crow and tweeting, I am sorry and owe an apology to Ryan Day, because, I mean, you talk about the vitriol after the Michigan game and all the reactions of wanting him fired, get him out of here, don't even let him coach the playoff game. Like, I get a lot of that was a vocal minority, but there are a lot of Buckeye fans that were done with Ryan Day in general. And you look like, and that's to me what makes this run so impressive, Trip, is we know Ryan Day is a good coach he's a good offensive mind, right? He's a good play caller, good play designer. He's obviously a great recruiter. And I think now he's showing, the quality that maybe people don't give enough credit for, and that's his leadership. It's not this team was in the depths of hell after that Michigan game. And this team they could have easily folded, pack it up. Okay, we're at it. Like, we lost, even though the national title is over, or still available, I should say. The season's over. We lost to Michigan. And the fact that they not only responded, but it's the fact that they responded by playing so far their 3 best games of the season and only getting better. I want to play this for you after the game. Ryan Day basically highlighted how this team is grown and shown their true colors when things are the toughest.
The story of this team is yet to be told. And no great accomplishments are ever achieved without going through adversity. That's just the truth. And so we've gone through our share of adversity, and that's life. And I've told those guys that. So we're not focused on what's coming down the road. We're not focused on what happened in the past. We're focused on right now and being right where we are. And then at the end, we want to be able to tell the story of this team. And that's really what this team's focused on right now.
I mean, that's a guy that, Trip, like you talk about, showing your true colors when things are the worst. This guy looked adversity in the face, turned it around, and has done a great job inspiring his team. Like, again, the leadership we don't talk about a lot with Ryan Day, in part because everyone wants to bang on his losses in the biggest moments. He's a great leader, and I think that's now showing tenfold here on this massive stage.
And the conversation's still going to be going into the national championship game next Monday against Notre Dame. Well, do they have to win the national championship for this to be considered a successful season?
I would still say yes.
Really?
I would still say yes, in part because of when you look at I know it's Vegas. When you look at the odds here, they're one of the biggest favorites in terms of a national title game. It's 9.5 points to start. This is a game they should win. I think at this point, if you're Ohio State, finish the job. I think when you're this close and you're facing a team that you are better than, you're not firing Ryan Day. You're not firing Ryan Day after this game. But I think when you look back in 2024, it will feel, maybe it'll change. I won't say a failure. It will feel like a missed opportunity. It'll feel like a chance you had that was not captured. We'll get to missed opportunities here in a second when it comes to Penn State. I'll kind of crank it down a level where I won't say failure, where I would have called, if they lost to Texas, I would have said this season's failure. They lose to Notre Dame in the national title game. I would say it's more, for me, a missed opportunity than a failure. You're saying at this point, successful season, and if they win, it's gravy?
I think it's a successful season, but I like how you phrased it as a missed opportunity. Like you said it, right? Let's turn the page to the other Big Ten team and Penn State. They fall to Notre Dame 27-24, back and forth game, had a couple of leads. Look, Penn State this season had an opportunity to beat Ohio State, had a 10-point lead in that game, couldn't hold on to it. Penn State had a 10-point lead in the national semifinal against Notre Dame, couldn't hold on to it, and then was able to fight back. Not only fight back to tie, but fight back to take the lead with about 6 minutes to go. 24-17, you have your outstanding defense on the field and can't close it out. I think what strikes me about these playoffs and this format, you have to win a lot of big games to get to the national semifinals. And if you're Texas, who's feeling the same way as Penn State right now, if you lose the national championship, it's like the same thing. You have to win 3 games, 3 challenging postseason games after a grueling schedule where there's going to be ups and downs throughout. Yeah, there's a margin for error now in the regular season, but it's still not that wide of a margin for error. If Indiana loses a second game, they're not in the playoffs. If Penn State on the road at USC or on the road at Minnesota drops one of those games, based on their strength of schedule, are they in the playoffs? Probably, because of the way everything else shook out the end of the year, but maybe not. Yeah, there's a margin, but it's still relatively slim. But then how difficult it is to get through the playoffs. Anytime you're one win from a national championship game, it's just a huge miss. It's a missed opportunity because they're so hard to come by. And that's why to finish the Ohio State discussion, right? I don't know how you couldn't define it as a successful season at this point for the Buckeyes. If you told, again, loaded roster, expectations, but if you told me at the beginning of the season, Ohio State's going to roll through the playoff with wins over Tennessee, Oregon, which was number 1 all year in the Big Ten champions, and Texas, that's pretty hard to say, how much. Even the greatest coaches in the history of the sport, usually if you have a 50% winning percentage against top 10 teams, let alone top 5 teams, and for Ohio State to do it that way, by far and away, a successful season.
Just to highlight that, because I'm glad you brought the path and who they've beaten up. Look at this season, Trip. Ohio State this year has played 6 games against top 10 opponents. They're 5-1, and look at the margin of victory. They beat number 8 Indiana by 23 points, number 7 Tennessee by 25. They beat Penn State on the road by a touchdown. They beat Texas here last night by 14. They were number 3 in the country when you look at the college football playoff rankings, not the seeding, the rankings. Mm-hmm. Texas was 3rd, won by 2 touchdowns, and they beat Oregon a few weeks ago by 20. They're outside of Penn State, they're winning by 2 or 3 touchdowns against 4 of the top 5 teams that are in the country.
And why do I say it's a successful season? Because if you and SportsCenter put this up last night after the game, most wins versus an AP top 5 opponent in a single season. Granted, you're playing a lot more games now,
right?
But in a single season in the AP poll era since 1936, only 2019 LSU 1967 USC, and
Hmm.
1943 Notre Dame. Only 3 other teams have 4
Wow.
victories in a single season against top 5 teams.
Wow. Very impressive. And I don't know off the top of my head the margin of victory for those teams. But when you look at, we just talked about how much
Really a
Ohio
fact you
State.
should know. It
I
really is a
know.
fact you should know.
I'm
off the
sorry,
top
not
of your
knowing
head.
the 1943 Notre Dame schedule and results. My apologies.
Yeah.
Like, I doubt, right? I would assume no, that those teams did not dominate the way Ohio State's dominated these top 10 and top 5 opponents. It's, again, Ryan Day beats everybody but Michigan. It's a problem, but for those that want him out of town, like the guy is winning all these big games, and good luck trying to get anyone else in here. But that's, again, not a question or debate now with what he's doing and getting them to this point. We also start this, or this is going to circle back to where we started here, Trip, talk about missed opportunity here. That's what it feels like for Penn State. And that to me is like the biggest frustration in their loss. I was so confident. I've never felt more confident going to a game, to be honest with you, than this one.
Yeah.
In large part because everything I thought, like, going to this game favored Penn State, where I thought their defense was a little bit better. The health was better for sure. And you see how this game played out. Or like if you told me before the game, Trip, right? If you look at some of these numbers here, if you told me before the game that that Notre Dame's rushing attack, one of the best in the country, would average just 2.8 yards per carry, that Riley Leonard would throw 2 interceptions in this game, that Abdul Carter would be a man possessed and make you forget about the injury he was dealing with, and the fact that you would have some refereeing luck, we'll say, or at least some of the calls go your way, I would have.
Wait, you missed the biggest one. And Penn State would run for 204 yards with Nicholas Singleton having 3 touchdowns.
If you told me all of that, I would have, not kidding, I would have bet my life. Bet my life. Penn State would have won. I would be dead right now.
And 5 sacks. 5 sacks.
And
8 tackles for loss. Yeah.
The more we talk about it, it's so this to me, like, you go leaning into my Penn State fandom here, just to be frank, this to me is the worst loss of my Penn State fandom. That starts back in 2012, in large part because of everything you and I just highlighted going their way, the magnitude of the game. For them to not be able to grab this game and win, it hurts. It really hurts, Trip. And still, we're about a day and a half removed from the game. My overall emotion, it's not anger, it's not frustration. It honestly still is disbelief. Like, I truly still cannot believe we're sitting here talking about Penn State not winning this game.
Especially the way that it played out for the first 28 minutes of the football game. And there's so many little turning points. And that's why, look, Notre Dame wins games this way. This is how Notre Dame plays. Their defense makes some plays. Mitch Jeter in these playoffs has made some kicks. Riley Leonard, not always perfect, not always pretty, but gutsy. We talk about paths to winning. Notre Dame just made a few more plays. But you're right. It feels like a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity in the game when you start to break down. Like, you can point to so many different plays throughout the game. We'll talk about individual performances, but I'll get to the swing plays that create a small margin in a game like this, a real small margin in a game like this. But what makes it sting the most is both of us, right? Penn Staters, proud Penn Staters, diehards. I work on the broadcast team, and like, I hurt after the game to watch the reaction of a Devon J. Thomas in his final game for Penn State, of an Abdul Carter playing with one arm. Like, he barely used his left arm the entire game. He was the most impressive player on the field. For Drew Aller, who didn't have his best game, but poured his heart and soul into the season. And they're not there at this point without Drew Aller leading the fourth quarter comeback against USC, for that last drive in the 4th down conversions against Minnesota, with what he did, his entire body of the work throughout the course of a grueling 16-game season. They're not there without Drew Aller. To watch him hurt and him get the blame and hear it from social, to see James Franklin and his family walking off the field, people I'm around and get to know, it hurts. It really hurts. But what makes it hurt more is it's so hard. Like, look at those scenarios I just talked to. You have to have a lot go your way. You have to stay healthy, which Penn State relatively was all year long. Lost KJ Winston at the beginning of the year, first-round NFL draft pick. Lost their starting tackle, Anthony Donko. And the way Zachy Wheatley and Jalen Reed played in the secondary, you kind of forgot about it. With the way Nolan Rucci emerged and took it that next step, why did he come to Penn State to develop in Chuck Losey's strength and conditioning program? Look at what he did down. You forget about it because depth is really critical. And Notre Dame, credit them, their depth on defense with all the injuries they've had was a real big difference for him this. But what hurts the most is, you talked about it, that word, that phrase, we keep coming back to it, missed opportunity, because it's so hard to get there. So hard to get there. Injuries, a little luck. What's your schedule going to be like? There's going to be unbalanced schedules now with these mega conferences. Look, there's no doubt Penn State had a good path in the playoff because it's the first year of this new format, and they got a bracket that was favorable, and they played at SMU and they played Boise State. You still have to go out and play the games and play well, and they did. So you're sitting there in the semifinals, and it's like, okay, playing with a little pizzazz right here, but you got a couple breaks to go your way. And you're not always going to get those breaks. It's really, really hard to get there. And then to be so close, to have 2 leads in the game, to be able to point to all the different plays in the game that you weren't able to just make. And then to be that close in a matchup you felt like we both thought Penn State would win. We just rattled off a bunch of numbers, and you're like, okay, if that happens, Penn State definitely won. But then the gut punch at the end, yeah, that's what makes it really, really hurt. Really, really hurt. And it's been so long since they've been there, too. Like, it felt like, okay, this is going to be their, even if they lost the national championship to Ohio State, like, that's a whole nother discussion. And what a discussion it would be over the next week and a half to prepare and in the lead up to that, right? Penn State, Ohio State, do they finally get over the hurdle? But it felt like this would at least be that kind of coronation of James Franklin and Penn State and back. And it's not just about James Franklin. It's about like what the whole school had been through since 2012. And man, to be that close and to not, like, the weird thing is here, you can be incredibly optimistic, right? And we'll talk about roster retention as being a critical factor in where Penn State kind of positions themselves for next season. Like, there's no doubt they're one of the top 5 teams and top 5 programs, one of the top 5 head coaches in all of college football right now. They're at least in, you can bicker and nitpick and say it was top 5, top 6, top 7, top 8, right? No one's going to question that. So you're really optimistic, like, okay, they'll get another chance. They'll be back. But there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. And I think that's what makes this an incredibly tough pill to swallow, that they were so close and couldn't put it away and had chances to win it and then to fall short. A lot of credit to Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. Ton of credit to them. But Penn State felt like the team with more to take it from that big picture missed opportunity, which really hurts, to the more the microcosm of it and the game. They missed opportunities in the game too.
You're right. And look, it really starts and ends with 2 groups, quarterback and receiver. Drew Aller picked a bad time to have the worst game since 2023, Ohio State. The receivers did him no favors in terms of getting open. Luke Warren writes it on YouTube in our comments. I think he's right. And I'm curious your thoughts here. Aller never looked comfortable in the pocket. He seemed confused. His accuracy at times was off. His decision-making was off. What'd you see?
I saw the best pass defense in the country on the other side. So I know everyone immediately wants to point the fingers at Penn State and at Aller and the receiver group that had no receptions in the game. Aller certainly missed a few throws early.
Yes.
I thought he missed Singleton on a wheel route. He got away with a couple of decisions in the red zone because of penalties, right? The one fade to Wallace.
The first one, I think he saw the flag.
Yep. Yep,
Like
I agree.
that one, the one to Warren inexcusable. I think the first one, like I said, that drew the holding call to it was Harrison Wallace in the corner. I don't fault him for that one.
But he put the ball in harm's way. Even though he put the ball in harm's way, and then he did it again in a spot you can't do it at the end of the game. Look, I know all the dialogue is about, especially those who cover and follow and root for Penn State, is about Penn State. But also in that situation, you have to give Notre Dame and Al Golden's defense a ton of credit. They had a great game plan for it. Yeah, he could have hit, if he was on, I've seen him drop that ball in that bucket to Singleton on that wheel route or to Warren between two levels a couple of times. And maybe there's a decision where he had somewhere else to go with the football on a few of those plays. Look, I'm not saying he played a great game because he did put the ball in harm's way. But a lot of credit also has to go to that Notre Dame defense. A lot of credit also has to go to that Notre Dame defense. To me, when I talk about missed opportunities in the game, like I'm not pointing a finger at Aller. I'm not pointing a finger at the receivers. I'm not pointing a finger at Cam Miller, falling down, or Jalen Reed not making a tackle. Like I'm not pointing fingers at those guys. It's a collaborative effort. Like, so here are the plays. Throws a little behind him, but Singleton catches that first one where Penn State settles for 3 instead of getting 7. Maybe it's a 14-0 Penn State lead at the end of the first half. Not able to come up with that fumble when Angeli comes in. And then for Angeli to dink and dunk them down the field and Notre Dame get 3 going into the locker room, I thought that was a turning point. 10-0 Penn State. They're dominating the game. Notre Dame finding a way to get 3 to make it a one-possession game going into half, then getting the ball coming out of half. Obviously, great third quarter by Notre Dame. Great third quarter. But in a game like this, you wonder, like, when's that championship play going to come? What's in a big game, someone has to make a play. Sawyer did it last night.
Yep.
What's the play that sends your team to the national championship? I thought Penn State, and this is they're gritty, they're gutsy, they're resilient. I thought, oh my God, what happened? Notre Dame went up 17-10. Penn State has no answers offensively or defensively right now. And it looked like desperation mode. And then they put together that drive, went right down the field and tied it at 17. And they were able to run and reestablish the line of scrimmage, and Singleton and Allen and Warren and what he was able to do in the passing game, running game. It's like, all right, there they are. And then when denied Dennis Sutton dropped into coverage and made that interception, I thought that's the play that Penn State, I thought that's the type of play that just sent a team to a national championship game. Then they get the call to go their way. Then they're ahead 24-17. And it's like, oh, now they really got this. Now they just made a huge play on defense, got a call, cashed it in. No way Notre Dame's going 75 yards in the final 8 minutes to tie this back up. And I don't think Notre Dame, the worst thing that could happen there for the Penn State defense was to allow a big splash play. Because if Notre Dame went down and earned it, tip your cap to them. They go down and earn it. But when they made the splash play with Greathouse, and credit Notre Dame's wide receivers, Greathouse did it twice. Evans did it once. Winning contested balls, Notre Dame goes 11 for 17 on third downs in this game. And they weren't all third and shorts. They converted a few third and longs to extend drives and flip the field position. Not always get points, but to change field position early where it felt like Penn State could really take over the game. And their receivers made, for all the discussion about them not really having a whole lot, they made some contested catches. One over Zion Tracy. One time they got a good matchup on Kobe King with the running back. I think it was Aeneas Williams down the sideline on a ball.
Yep.
Like they did some things in the passing game on third and long situations too, where they won some contested balls. I think Faison had one for him too. They made some plays there. And that wasn't something I expected. I thought anytime they got in a third and long, Penn State would get off the field. Their receivers made plays. But like all those things are what could have been for Penn State. And then to get it back, you go 3 and out, then get another stop. Durant gets a big sack, and you get it back with 47 seconds left. And I think it was the right decision, being aggressive and trying to score points and win it. It just feels like a whole lot more what could have been in the microcosm of the game as well for Penn State, as the reason you're saying not only did they miss the opportunity because it's hard to get there, but a missed opportunity in the game. Played well. I mean, we rattled off all the stats right at the top of this. Penn State played very, very well. But ultimately, to get to a championship, you have to make one or two plays. And while it looked like there was at points during the game, they made them that was going to get it there, just didn't make enough. And Notre Dame made just enough. And they're able to pull it out. Like, is that a fair assessment? Is that how you felt? Why? I know I kind of went on a long-winded rant there, but that was my feeling from the sideline, my perspective, and being able to feel the pendulum shifts and the crowd, which was loud and impactful. It felt like a big game. It lived up to the hype of a big game. And in a big game, the margin is so slim. That's just my biggest, like, it is so slim.
And why my emotions are more like disbelief and shock and feeling like the, big missed opportunity versus like anger, because there have been plenty of times where Penn State's lost in big games where you're frustrated and angry, is because, like you said, I thought Penn State played pretty well. And we've seen, right, in a lot of big games, there's been maybe Penn State skews more conservative. We're not going to be aggressive. We're going to kind of take it easy. We don't want to make the big mistake. And we've talked about it. Since that Ohio State loss, there has been a different demeanor with this Penn State team. There's been a different demeanor with James Franklin. And I thought that was highlighted in the Oregon game. While it was, again, another loss against a good team, you saw Penn State lose in, let's say, a different fashion. They went out there, they swung, they played well. They went toe for toe, punch for punch with the best team in the country. And they were not scared, and they did not, they were aggressive, which is something that you haven't seen from Penn State in a big game in a long time. And I thought in this game, you come out the first 20 minutes. I mean, honestly, Trip, when Singleton goes in the first time, it's 10-0. My friends and I were like, all right, let's start looking at Airbnbs. Like, this game's over. I thought the way they dominated the game, the physicality, their offensive line pushing Notre Dame's defensive line back, it felt like almost every single rushing attempt. It's like they have no answer. And then, like you said, when Notre Dame runs off 17 in a row, and you're like, oh my God, like they're going to lose this game. Like, the momentum's gone. To answer with 2 straight scoring drives, to take the lead, to make a play like deny Dennis Sutton, getting the pick, again, I wouldn't have thrown the flag. I think it was a little ticky-tack, but you get the luck from the referees to go your way and wipe out an interception that allowed and leads to a touchdown. It's 24-17. I'm thinking game over. Again, game over. And in large part because of Penn State's aggressiveness with how they're executing, how their defense is playing, even though, again, they're giving up some third downs, they're still playing pretty well, getting after Riley Leonard. The offense is running the ball really well with the 2 running backs. It's just, it hurts because, again, Penn State played in a big game differently than we've seen them play in a large part of James Franklin's tenure. And that's why, number one, I try to stay off social media. I don't know about you after the game, but I'm also a sucker. I just can't. There's a lot of discussion about James Franklin again, and people want to flash his 1-15 record against top 5 opponents and 4-20 against top 10. I don't put any blame on James Franklin in this game.
I think it's really hard to stay off social media in the profession that we're in. Like, I think you want to, it's disappointing. It's hard, but it's really hard to in the profession that we're both in. Yeah, I'm not going to play the James Franklin game here. Let me ask you this. Okay. This is my like new go-to when talking about James Franklin. I had this discussion with a friend the other day.
Let's hear it.
James Franklin, the question is, can he ever win like this big game narrative? Well, excuse me, they just won. The bar always moves for him. They just beat 2 teams in 2 college football playoff games. Here's James Franklin. He's won the Rose Bowl. He's won 2 Fiesta Bowls. He's won the Cotton Bowl, and he's won a Big Ten championship. Do those not count as big games? Like it's just such a move. Well, you played so-and-so. Well, you played James Franklin and won 2 college football playoff games. So James Franklin has won 2 college football playoff games, a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, and 2 Fiesta Bowls. And we're going to tell me he hasn't won a big game?
I agree. No, we're on the same page. I think it's twofold. I think there is a reality. And again, how we're talking about this game, right? It does feel frustrating because this was a very winnable game that you see Penn State come out on the short end of the stick of, and it feels like it's happened way more often than it should. Yeah. With that said, I do think how the game played out is important. And again, I thought James Franklin was aggressive. I thought he coached a really good game. I like the decision with 50 seconds left to go for it. And you're 50 seconds away from going to the national title game with the ball in your hand. I love the fact that even though Drew Aller has not played well to that point, you believe in him enough. So you know what? I think he can make 2 or 3 throws here to get us in field goal range. We can hit the field goal and go to the national title game. I love that. I'd rather go down swinging than play conservative.
And I don't think you had to throw it. Here's my thing. You had 2 timeouts. Singleton just ripped off 11 on first down. I don't think they had to throw there either.
Fair. That's fair. No, I if you want to question the play call, that's fair. I think if you're Drew, just throw the ball out of bounds. But.
No, and I think the initial read was to Warren, and then you trust Aller in that situation to make the right decision. But I'm saying on that drive, I'm not questioning the call. I'm saying on that drive, it's not just putting the ball in Aller's hand. I think it's all it takes is one crease and Nick Singleton's gone.
Right.
And that's why I was surprised. I know at this point, it's kind of like a moot point. It feels over. I was surprised they didn't run it out with Singleton on the ensuing kickoff after the because Franklin did a good job of making sure there are at least a couple of seconds to get the ball in their hands again after Jeter kick. I'm surprised they didn't allow Singleton an opportunity there. But I'm not saying, look, Drew can't make that throw back over the middle. And he knows it. Everyone knows it. Not saying anything that he doesn't know. And I feel bad for him. I feel really, really bad for him. Because they aren't there without Drew Aller. And I hope he knows that. I hope Penn State fans realize that. But in that situation, I'm not saying not to throw on that down, because ideally you don't make that throw and you live to see another down. They also had Notre Dame's expecting pass. The way you're running the football and only needing to get 45, 50 yards at that point and still 2 timeouts in your pocket and the clock stops on first downs, I don't think it's just pass. I think he still could run the ball there too, as they exhibited on that first down with Singleton.
No, that's fair. And that's fair. But I think the overall concept and the overall point, right, of just like going for it. We're not gonna play for overtime.
Here's my thought, and I think you made a really good point there. Even though they lost to Oregon, even though they lost to Notre Dame, how they went down in the big games, as opposed to how it played out against Ohio State, not scoring from inside the 5 on the goal-to-go situation, the long drive Ohio State has at the end of the game so you don't get the ball back.
Yep.
How they went down in these last 2 losses against great teams, it just felt different. Like, it felt like they turned a page. Like, the program, obviously the season's a huge step forward for Penn State and a massive success. Get to the playoff for the first time, get to the Final Four, win big games, win a home playoff game at Beaver Stadium in front of the loudest crowd that I've reached at Big Ten. Like, if you told anyone coming into the year, you're going to win a program record 13 games, you're going to play in the Big Ten championship, you're going to win a home playoff game at Beaver Stadium, win the Fiesta Bowl, and play in a thriller of a semifinal and lose it by 3 points on a walk-off field goal, probably preseason, most people sign up for that. Sure, it stings.
My expectations were just make the playoffs, so I'm with you.
Sure, it stings in the moment, and it felt like it missed out because I still believe they might have been the better team. I still believe it. And you can look at so many missed chances during the game, and it's not to take away. Like, that's how Notre Dame wins games, though. They find a way. They're gritty. They're gutsy. They have that identity, that personality of their coach. That's a Riley Leonard game right there. It just is. Not always flashy, but somehow they got to 308. Like, the receivers not running great routes, but making a few big plays, and you get a guy fall down, you make a big play there, make a kick at the end. That's how they win. But because of how close it was and the missed opportunities, that's what makes it hurt more. I think when you step back and time goes by, it'll be an undoubtedly incredibly successful season for Penn State and a big step forward. But as you're talking about in those 2, they felt different this time, how they went down. And I think there's just a belief and expectation now that they're going to be right back there. It's hard to get back there, though. But wow. Yeah, it still hurts as Penn Staters. There's no doubt a couple days here after. This was going to hurt for a long time.
It does. It does feel like there's a little bit more hope after a big loss, just because, again, so many times you go down the same way. At least you feel okay. Execution, like, I'd rather have the execution.
They just didn't execute, Brian, that's it. You just said the word. They just didn't execute enough.
And I'd rather have that be the problem than just conservative nature. Like, that's, I think, easier to fix. And
Well, I think
we'll see now.
more often than not, you're gonna fix it. Like you're gonna make it. They proved this season they're gonna make. Oh, USC execute. Wisconsin execute. Boise State, SMU execute.
Texas, Ohio State. I mean, Quinn Ewers execute. And all of a sudden, we're talking about a different Ohio State executed to their credit. And I think it's, again, for that to be the problem, that's not been the first problem we've talked about for Penn State in these big games. And I think that's now more the problem. Gives me more optimism going into 2025 that, hey, well, again, it's another crushing loss. And again, you want to talk about all the records against top 5, top 10, whatever. I still feel like they are close and absolutely can break through sooner rather than later. With now the shift, it didn't result in this case in a win, but it does feel like there's a shift now going forward, or you can feel different and better going to a big game in 2025 where they are playing Oregon, they are playing Ohio State, so they're gonna have some big matchups here in the regular season next year.
Indiana's on the schedule.
It's Nebraska, if they can continue to build, like it's not going to be like last year's schedule where you only play one ranked opponent in Ohio State.
It's hard to say though. It's January 11th.
True. That's fair. That's fair. Speaking of the future then, Trip.
Yep.
Where does Penn State go from here, right? Because now the season is over. We can talk about the loss, but now looking in the past is not going to help anything going in the future. What does Penn State have to do? Like, where do they go from here? How do they get over the hump in your opinion? Where does the build for 2025 start?
It's hard to say because you're not sure who's going to enter the NFL draft and who's going to enter the transfer portal, what they're going to be able to obtain through that transfer portal, and what it will look like going into the 2025 season. I think what's really important right now in the portal window for these playoff teams that fall out opens for 5 days after the game. What is really important for Penn State, and I think they have all the resources in place to do it now. And remember, schools are going to get between $20 and $22 million next year to be able to really a salary cap for their roster and how they're going to distribute that between all of their varsity sports. But, football is going to get probably 75% at least of that money, especially at a place like Penn State. What Notre Dame has done, a guy like Watts, their safety, who was outstanding in that game, what Ohio State has done, it's not just who do you attract through the portal. I still think the best way to build a program is through recruiting and development. I think Penn State's done it incredibly, incredibly well. James Franklin had a very powerful message after the game. He said he does not want to be a transactional. He does not want it to be a transactional, and he was in tears saying this, not a transactional experience, but a transformational experience. And if you have an opportunity to be around James Franklin, as I'm fortunate enough to, and I truly believe him as a head coach, Penn State fans, he is a modern day Joe Paterno. In his belief in the collegiate model, doing things the right way, getting players that represent something bigger than themselves, but also getting an educational experience, placing them in a collegiate community where they can learn, grow, mature as young men, and give back to those around them that are supporting them on a daily basis. I think they've built a culture, a program, and have a model that's really, really successful. But what have Ohio State and Notre Dame been able to? The two teams left, JTT, Sawyer, Lathan Ransom, Henderson, Ohio State, Egbuka, Carnell Tate. Ohio State retained its roster. Yeah, they added big guys in that portal, but they retained their roster. Notre Dame retained their roster. Penn State, the next week is crucial to their success in 2025. Who do they retain on their roster? Because there's a lot of guys that have decisions to make. Zane Durant, right before we started recording this, said he's back. And look, you want to give the guy honest feedback. If you feel like he's ready for the next level and he should pursue that dream at the next level, you got to be honest with him. But part of it now is, okay, still, what can you do for us? We can financially compensate you to stay and play with us. This is good for your development and also good for us. That model has shifted a little bit where now there's a little bit more an incentive to stay. But to be elite, I think you need to fill holes through the portal, recruit at a high level, and develop. but also now retaining and recruiting your own roster and retaining your roster for guys that have tough decisions to make. That's where Penn State's at. And Durant, to me, was probably, if not the most important, one of the top 3 most important guys for them to retain. They need to retain one of the 2 backs. I'm not sure they'll retain both, but Singleton and Allen, they need to retain one of the 2 backs on offense. Dennis Sutton is critical. Kobe King is critical. Zachy Wheatley, I believe, is coming back. That's critical, the way he played in these playoffs. Then all of a sudden, you have a pretty good foundation right there for next year. What do you retain at the cornerback position? The quarterback, Drew Aller, obviously said he's coming back. And I think a lot of people, thought, okay, if he carries them to a championship, maybe that changes, but that's okay. He'll be back. So outside of that, but those are the guys. If you can retain kind of a core that we talked about, then you continue to get the development. Like your offensive lines will be pretty much intact. I know they lose Warren. Like you lose your 2 best players, Warren and Carter, who are All-American players on both sides. But there's no reason Dennis Sutton can't be an All-American next year. I think he was outstanding down the stretch. It's kind of that passing of the baton. The tight end position, Reynolds, Dinkins, who was unbelievable as a blocker this year. And then you get Rapplier back, plus another 5-star prospect coming in there. You don't replace a Tyler Warren. He's a unicorn in what he can do. You don't replace him, but you're deep. It's going to be a rollover there. Aller's going to take another step. I think the future is incredibly bright, but the next week's really telling based on roster retention right now. And that's the most important thing. That's why Notre Dame and Ohio State are in the championship. They retained guys because then you couple talent with experience. And that's one of the most unique parts of college football is you got this portal. Everyone's talking about portal. Who are you bringing in? Penn State definitely needs to bring in. They already brought in 2 receivers. Probably need to bring another. But retention is the most critical thing. It's not talked about enough because that's why the 2 teams left are still playing football.
Could not agree more. I think that 2025 starts right there, like you said, in this next week or so, and trying to convince as many guys to come back. I'm glad you brought up Ohio State. I'm glad you brought up Notre Dame. I'll take it even a year back. Michigan. Yep. I don't know how you feel, but watching the end of that Notre Dame Penn State game, and again, Penn State, we both feel like they had missed opportunities to win the game. I felt a lot like I did after watching Michigan lose to TCU in 2022. Where Michigan, I thought, was a better team against TCU. They made plenty of mistakes and gave the game away and lost it to TCU. And what happened? They brought a lot of guys back, right? That defense was very veteran-laden. Same thing with the offense. They learned from it. They built from it. And obviously, we know they
did it again this year. They just didn't have an offense.
Right. No, you're right. And Ohio State, Kirk Herbstreit brought up after the game yesterday, and we've talked about it as well. Everyone's talking about transfer portal who Ohio State got and how they bought their roster. But especially defensively, like you said, basically everybody outside of Caleb Downs was there last year. They did a great job.
Simon, the linebackers, Simon, the D tackle, Williams they have 4 NFL players on the defensive line, but
that all could have went. Right. They could have lost half their defense in the NFL last year, and Ryan Day and the NIL collector did a great job of keeping them in Columbus for another year. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing now, right, in the era of the transfer portal, continuity is king. And if Penn State, like you said, Zane Durant, huge. If you can keep the guys you just mentioned or a large majority of those guys you just listed, all of a sudden you now have a team that is cohesive, a lot of veteran experience with that chip on your shoulder of, hey, we came so close. Mm-hmm. Now you can have vengeance on your mind. I think that matters. Mm-hmm. Outside of what you just said, I think the other big important key here, and you mentioned in the transfer portal, is wide receiver, I would say development. Something has to happen where you have to, I think there's talent. I think now it's trying to get the most out of the talent and having those guys play better than maybe even their talents as they are is key. I mean, it is problematic, Trip, that Penn State's had in the last decade one receiver with 1,000 or more yards in a season. That was Jahan Dotson back in 2021. Receiver's been an issue for Penn State in the last few years, especially. And we saw it pop up in this game against Notre Dame where that number 1 pass secondary just dominated them. Penn State, in order to, I think, get to that next level, needs better, more consistent receiver play. And I would agree that probably has to come in the transfer portal, but also has to come with development as well. And that's, I think, another, if you're James Franklin, another area outside of retention, you have to hyper focus on this spring to make sure going to the summertime, your receiver room is better equipped than it has been in years past.
Yeah, and it already will be with the two that they're bringing in. I think they bring in a speedster from Troy that can be a real difference maker there.
Yep.
But also another year of development for Amari Evans. Made some big plays for him in this college football playoff, and he can take a top off of defense. It's about doing it more consistently. Trey Wallace was a consistent 4 or 5 catch guy over the course of the regular season, but he did not consistently take his game to a number 1 level.
No.
They didn't have an Igbuka. They didn't have a Jeremiah Smith. They had guys who played well and made enough plays in the passing game for a majority of the season, but couldn't prove to be, in this last game against Notre Dame, a difference maker and step up and make a big play through the passing game. But still, another year of development. All of a sudden, you start to develop, Wallace gets another year. Evans gets another year. And then you bring in a couple of guys in the portal. Then you see, what's a Tyseer Denmark going into next season? What is Caden Saunders healthy next year? Does he have a role in that offense? They're really high on Peter Gonzalez, who was hurt this year. There's a couple of guys there. And then, another class.
So you think there's talent there?
I think there's talent, but I agree with you. I still think you need to supplement it with some guys from the outside. You'd love to see them just hit a home. I think they've done a good job at the position in the portal. Like, I know Julian Fleming didn't have a big number this year. He's a big factor in their run game success.
Absolutely.
They really became a run-first team. Julian Fleming deserves a lot of credit for playing winning football and he and Dinkins are kind of the most two overshadowed guys on that offense. For playing a big role in their run game success. They became a run-first team. They found an identity and they wrote it, but they just didn't make enough plays. But I thought he was a good addition. Like Mitchell Tinsley a couple years ago was a good addition. Forgetting someone that was a part of that group from a year or two ago that I thought was solid pickup. You just wish you could get someone that really is, where is that difference maker at the spot? I don't think they've missed necessarily at the receiver position. There's been some, like everyone saw Malik McLean kind of pan out a little bit more this year for Arizona State in a different setting than he did at Penn State. There's been some.
Cephas was a miss.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. There's been some, but just haven't, whatever reason, you would think the attraction of playing with Drew Aller and that passing game and that offense with Andy Kotelnicki and the protection they're going to have on the offensive line next year, you would think it would be a premier destination for a receiver. And they got 2, but you'd think there's got to be one more splash that they can make at that area in the portal.
You're right, and that's something to keep an eye on here as I think the winter concludes and the spring picks up here in a little bit as well. I'm with you. I think you can get some development. That's where it does feel like, going back to the last thing about Penn State kind of breaking through some of these big games, that's an area where if you can get more consistent receiver play, it makes, again, the margin for error a little bit wider to where, again, you're not relying and putting all your eggs in, let's say in this game, in Tyler Warren and Nick Singleton out of the backfield because your receivers don't have a catch. It makes everyone's life easier. If you have one, ideally 2 or 3 receivers you can rely on that can consistently get open and make plays for you, that's been a big problem and a constant here for Penn State in a lot of these big games in the last few years. If you can hit on that, and like you said, they haven't really had, no disrespect to Sean Clifford, like they haven't had a quarterback returning where receivers from other teams and other conferences, I got to go play with that guy. Drew Aller, despite the last time we saw him, by not being great, it does feel like the talent he has, potential he has, there are receivers that look around and say, you know what, he's coming back. Andy, like you said, Andy Kotelnicki and his offensive creativity, he's coming back. That's a guy, that's a team, that's an offense I want to play in. It does feel like Penn State's positioned themselves offensively for the first time in a long time here to be an attractive portal destination for any receiver that wants to shake loose again, whether it's right now or springtime as well. If Penn State can hit on that, again, hit on the roster retention trip, it feels like 2025, despite the gut-wrenching end to 2024, it feels like big things are possible next year for sure.
Wow. Semifinals are in the books. National championship. We knew we'd be talking a Big Ten. We thought we'd be talking an all Big Ten national championship when we did our predictions on Monday, but we'll talk about Ohio State, Notre Dame. I think also look at other storylines, right, in the upcoming week. What else? There are other teams in the Big Ten besides the ones we've kind of focused on here over the last month. Look at other storylines. But I can't believe we're down to one last. It's a long season. Man, it's been a long last couple of weeks. For me, long last. You start to feel it. Last night, I slept from right when the game ended. Kind of watched SportsCenter for a little bit. I slept for 10 hours last night, and I could use another 10 tonight. But I can't imagine how these guys feel. But the opportunity for Ohio State and Notre Dame to play for a national championship. It'd be really nice if Notre Dame joined a conference and joined the Big Ten. I think that would really be a perfect fit for them.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, you need to. There's so many. College football is still so broken. It's so broken, but we got treated to two unbelievable games. Hopefully we get a good championship game. I know the Buckeyes are nearly 10-point favorites, but hopefully we get a good championship game too, because it's been a fun season. It's been a remarkable season. We've learned a lot this season. I think this season is going to change. This is the first seismic shift in the change of college football, the expansion of the 12-team playoff. At the same time, you have all the moving and shaking of NIL and the money coming from the NCAA, the 20 to 22 million going to the schools and the power conferences to distribute. I think we're also going to see a lot of changes again after this season, because this is kind of like dipping your toes in. How does it play out for the first time? But it's been fun. It's been fun to cover. There's a lot to talk about when you get a season like this.
You're right. And that's what's made really this first year of the Still Enrolled podcast so much fun. We've always had a lot to talk about, a lot of exciting, intriguing topics to break down here as well in the first year of it in the Big Ten, especially. So that's been a lot of fun. Still a lot more good stuff to come. Like you said, we'll be all over this national title game, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Get your previews, get your set for that big game. I will be there in Atlanta. So we'll watch it firsthand. Maybe a Big Ten team wins a national title. We'll have a ton of reaction to that game as well. And also, like you said, we got a lot of other Big Ten teams to talk about. We'll do a year in review as well. Some grades and look aheads to 2025. So we still got a lot coming here on the Still Enrolled podcast. Even though the college football season, one game left, we got a long way to go. Thank you for joining us here.
I enjoyed our live Saturday morning experience here with everyone.
Same. This was fun. I'm glad we should do this more often. I think the live was fun here. It gives you a chance to interact as well as we do banter about whatever the hell we're talking about. So we'll do this a lot more, but that's why it's important. Subscribe, especially on YouTube. Subscribe. Still Enrolled as a channel. If you're watching us for the first time, thank you. Make sure you, again, subscribe to come around a lot more often. If you are more of a listener, you don't want to look at our ugly faces, can't blame you. Still Enrolled wherever you do get your podcasts. We are there as well. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for joining us here on this debut live stream. And we'll talk to you soon right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.